This is the Notorious Skeptic talking about religious tests for office. Recently, we've seen a rising phenomenon of Democrats questioning Republican candidates for the courts or for other positions and using their religious beliefs as a reason as to why they are not fit for office. Recently, the Young Turks gloated over the fact that Bernie Sanders had attacked a Trump nominee for having said that Muslims and Jews stand condemned because they have not accepted Christ. And I can understand that to modern day people that can sound very bigoted, and opinions will obviously differ on that, and whether such ideas are good for society is obviously a debate in and of itself, but it is a typical belief for fundamentalist Christians who constitute a big part of American citizens. It is a belief that according to the Constitution they are allowed to hold, even in public, and that should have no relevance when it comes to their fitness for office. Someone's religious beliefs, even the ones they express in public, cannot be brought up during a hearing as to whether they're fit for a political position. And whether somebody holds religious beliefs that can be considered bigoted is rather of the point. You can find these opinions bigoted, and you can even publicly attack them, and it's good to have societal discussions about whether these opinions are harmful or not, but a confirmation hearing is just not a place to do that. That's a place to discuss someone's political credentials, whether they can be bipartisan and objective. Those are the things that matter for a political position. There was also a big controversy about Amy Coney Barrett, who Trump had nominated for an appeals court position, and there the issue wasn't even that she would have said bigoted things, but just that she was a very conservative Catholic. And that's really becoming a slippery slope. I can understand that Democrats don't really like fundamentalist Christians, and I understand that fundamentalist Christians don't like liberals, but in politics, the whole point of being bipartisan means that we put aside such prejudices and we focus on whether somebody can do the job well. It would be equally wrong to question someone for being an atheist, including an atheist who said that religion is harmful, that Christians are generally backward-thinking people. If an atheist were to say such things, which would be a public expression of their personal beliefs, this should not be used to disqualify them from public office. But this shows how politicized all of these nominations for the judiciary and other positions are becoming. But they're also becoming personal and ideological. And that's getting very dangerous. Now, almost all nominations seem to be made along partisan lines. And that can only really seem to get worse from here. And I can understand that people who are liberals would rather have a liberal Christian or even an atheist in such a position, but obviously that's not something to bring up in such a hearing. It's especially interesting because obviously Muslims are going to believe that Christians don't worship Allah, they've rejected his last prophet, and if they were to publicly express such ideas, that shouldn't disqualify them from office either. Orthodox believers generally believe that their religion is the true religion and that other religions are wrong, and such a belief can be considered bigoted, but so can the belief of a socialist that capitalists support exploitation, that they're greedy. Basically, any person who adheres to an ideology and who believes that that ideology is better than other ideologies can be considered to be bigoted because they practice absolute thinking, where they believe one idea is right and another idea is wrong. But if we were to reason that way, only people who hold to relativistic beliefs would eventually be fit for office. And people who hold relativistic beliefs and who call people who hold absolutistic beliefs bigoted could in and of themselves be considered bigoted. You could say that Bernie Sanders was bigoted towards all fundamentalist Christians who believe in traditional Christian beliefs. And then you end up with a debate of who started first. Am I being intolerant towards intolerance, or am I being intolerant towards intolerance towards intolerance? Or towards intolerance of, you see, it's a slippery slope that never ends. Once you start bringing a person's personal beliefs into confirmation hearings like this, it's just, there's no way back. And you can be sure that conservative Republicans will do it when they're in the same position. And this is also part of the problem of the fact that the judiciary has become so politicized and so partisan. The concept of the Constitution as an evolving document has the problem that a judge can decide for himself in what way it is evolving or in what way it should evolve, and they'll likely be influenced by their party affiliation. Judges can then easily vote alongside partisan lines because they just adhere to the interpretation of the Constitution supported by their party, because that's a contemporary interpretation instead of one based on historical understanding of the document. Not only will it lead to partisan politics, but people have often criticized Scalia for having supposedly been influenced in his decisions by his conservative Catholic faith, which you could also argue that his conservative Catholic faith simply prevented him from wanting to overturn conservative precedent and wanted to be an activist in favor of liberal beliefs. And a lot of liberals are actually proud of judges who were activists and who were influenced by their liberal beliefs. But if you're allowed to be influenced by your personal views and by your personal ideology and by your philosophy, then you're also allowed to be influenced by your religion. If you're allowed to be partisan, if you're allowed to force your views on others, that can also include your religious views. It would be a double standard to say that an atheist or a liberal Christian or a Jew would be allowed to use their personal views to interpret the Constitution, but that a conservative Christian would not be allowed to do so. Obviously, there's supposed to be separation of church and state, but there's also supposed to be a separation of powers and supposed to be objectivity. Once judges start to side with their party and start to let their personal views influence their rulings, obviously conservative Christians are going to feel free to also let their conservative Christian beliefs influence their decisions, just as liberals let their liberal beliefs influence their decisions. Once you're allowed to let your personal views decide for you, you're also allowed to include your religion in there. It would be ridiculous to say that you can be influenced by your personal ideology, but it must be a secular ideology. Obviously, the state is supposed to be secular, but it's supposed to be secular in a democratic sense, where the people vote according to their conscience and they vote in agreement with the Constitution, not where judges interpret the Constitution based on their beliefs, but these beliefs have to be non-theistic. Now, I don't deny the right of Democrats or liberals to argue against what they consider to be bigoted Christian beliefs, but by doing so in confirmation hearings, they also, once again, risk alienating centrist voters. They risk alienating liberal or liberal conservative Christians. So, in my opinion, we should just go back to trying to be bipartisan and trying to be objective and to restore trust in the judiciary. A lot of liberals have complained about Bush versus Gore, but conservatives could easily justify that by saying that the Constitution is an evolving document, or they followed their heart, or they just did what was right and gave the law time to catch up. Once you start justifying reasoning like that, right-wing judges are going to do the same thing. And at that point, you can just know how a court will rule based on the political affiliation of its members. And that's obviously becoming very dangerous. At this point, it seems unlikely that someone like Lewis Powell or Anthony Kennedy or Byron White would ever be nominated by either side. Democrats seem to be very intent on only nominating very far-left judges, while Republicans seem very obsessed with nominating judges who are not only constitutionalists and originalists, but who are also very personally conservative. And it's ironic because originalism started off as something that was very much promoted by someone like Hugo Black, who ironically used originalism against what he saw as the right-winged activism of Republican appointed judges who were supporting laissez-faire economics, which Franklin Roosevelt said had no basis in the Constitution, but they were just making up. Hugo Black was actually one of the most famous originalists, and therefore it's ironic that originalism has become purely associated with conservative politics, where really it's just a way to avoid partisan courts, but also to avoid partisan courts that will decide in favor of right-wing causes. So, I'm just hoping that trust in the judiciary can eventually be restored, and I'm especially hoping that we can at least keep religion out of confirmation hearings. And I would prefer it if it were kept out of political debates as much as possible. Obviously, voters are going to be influenced by their religious beliefs, and obviously politicians have a right to appeal to religious voters, but it should be kept out of the political debates that are supposed to be objective and partisan and democratic. But these are just the words of a notorious skeptic. Take care.